My father-in-law never knew I was the one supporting his entire family until the day I came home with my 5-year-old daughter and discovered we were kicked out. The day I decided to become invisible was the same day I became the most powerful person in the Sullivan family. Not that any of them knew it. I remember sitting at our kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long gone cold, as my husband Michael paced back and forth. His father's business was failing, something about poor investments and a changing market. Michael didn't understand the details, but he understood the consequences. If Sullivan Manufacturing collapsed, so would the family's legacy, their status, their very identity. Dad's devastated Emily. He built that company from nothing. 30 years of his life gone. Michael's voice cracked. I'd never seen him like this. Vulnerable, scared. The golden son, the heir to the Sullivan throne, suddenly facing a future without his birthright. I nodded, letting him talk. Michael had always lived in his father's shadow, desperate for approval that came in small, measured doses. Richard Sullivan was not a man who gave praise easily, especially not to his son who chose to marry a woman from the wrong side of town, as he liked to remind everyone at family gatherings. We'll figure something out, I said, though I already had a plan forming in my mind. Before I married into the Sullivan family, I was Emily Chin, financial analyst with a knack for spotting opportunities others missed. I'd put my career on hold when our daughter Lily was born, not because Michael or his family expected it, though they certainly approved, but because I wanted those precious early years with her. What the Sullivans saw as a woman settling into her proper place, I saw as a temporary shift in priorities. What they didn't know was that I'd been investing my own money for years, building a portfolio that had grown substantial enough to make a difference. A big difference. The next day, while Michael was at work, I visited an old colleague, now a private investment broker. I set up a shell company, transferred my funds, and arranged for an anonymous investment in Sullivan Manufacturing. On paper, the company was saved by a mysterious angel investor who saw potential where others saw only failure. In reality, it was me, the woman Richard Sullivan introduced as Michael's wife because he couldn't be bothered to remember my name. It's a miracle, Richard announced at Sunday dinner 2 weeks later, raising his glass in a toast. The company's been saved. An investor with vision, with faith in what we've built. Who is it, Dad? Michael asked, beaming with relief. We should thank them properly. Richard waved his hand dismissively. They wish to remain anonymous. Some people don't need recognition. They understand the value of quiet contribution. He looked right through me as he said it, not a flicker of awareness in his eyes. I almost laughed. The irony was almost too perfect. Well, whoever they are, we owe them everything. Michael's mother Elaine chimed in, squeezing her husband's hand. No, Richard corrected her, chest puffing with pride. We owe them nothing. It was my reputation, my vision that attracted their investment. They saw what I've always seen, that Sullivan Manufacturing is destined for greatness. I took a sip of wine, hiding my expression. With my investment came a series of suggestions from the investor about modernizing operations, exploring new markets, implementing sustainable practices. Changes that Richard now claimed as his own brilliant insights. Months passed, and Sullivan Manufacturing not only recovered but thrived. My suggestions continued, filtered through the investment broker, and Richard implemented every one, taking full credit for the company's spectacular turnaround. Meanwhile, at home, my position in the family hierarchy remained unchanged. I was still just Michael's wife, the woman who didn't understand business, who should be grateful to be part of such a prestigious family. I don't know why you put up with it, my friend Natalie said over coffee. She'd known me since college and was the only person who knew the truth about Sullivan Manufacturing's miraculous recovery. You're literally funding their entire lifestyle while they treat you like an outsider. I shrugged, watching 5-year-old Lily on the playground across from the cafe. It's not about me. It's about her. I want her to have security, stability. And what about respect? Natalie challenged. What are you teaching her when you let them treat you like this? The question hit me harder than I expected. What was I teaching Lily? That it was okay to be invisible? that her worth was tied to what she could provide rather than who she was? But then I thought of the alternative, exposing the truth, watching Richard's empire crumble not from external forces, but from his own pride. The fallout wouldn't just affect him. It would affect Michael, the extended family, and ultimately Lily. It's complicated, I finally said. Family always is. That evening, at yet another Sullivan family dinner, Richard raised a toast to Michael for his contribution to the company's success. My husband had done nothing except follow his father's directives, but he glowed under the praise like a starved plant finally receiving sunlight. To Michael, Richard announced, "My son, my heir, a true Sullivan." Everyone cheered while I cut Lily's food into bite-sized pieces. And maybe someday, Emily will find something productive to do with her time, Richard added with a chuckle that others around the table echoed. Though I suppose someone has to keep house and watch the child. I felt Michael tense beside me, waiting for him to defend me. He didn't. Instead, he offered a weak smile and changed the subject. That night, as Michael slept soundly beside me, I slipped out of bed and went to my private office, a small converted closet that the Sullivans saw as an indulgence rather than a necessity. I logged into my investment accounts and checked the numbers. Sullivan Manufacturing's value had tripled since my intervention. My investment had more than paid off. I could cash out now, take my profits, and walk away. But then what? Expose myself as the savior they never knew they had? Watch the company and the family implode without my support? I closed the laptop and sighed. For now, the secret would remain mine. I didn't need recognition. I didn't need gratitude. As long as Lily had a secure future, I could endure their scorn, their dismissal, their casual cruelty. Or so I thought. I had no idea then that everything would change in just 3 months. The day I would come home with Lily to find our belongings on the street and my husband standing silently behind his father as our world collapsed. The day I would realize that sometimes invisibility is not a strength, but a wound that, when finally exposed, can change everything in an instant. It was a Thursday when my world collapsed. Nothing about that morning had hinted at what was coming. The sky was clear. Lily was excited about show and tell at kindergarten, and Michael had kissed me goodbye with the same distracted affection he always showed, his mind already at the office before his body had left our home. I'd spend the day like any other. Grocery shopping, answering emails from my investment broker about Sullivan Manufacturing's latest expansion plans, and preparing for a parent-teacher meeting the following week. Normal, routine, safe. When I picked Lily up from school, she clutched a drawing she'd made of our family, stick figures standing in front of a house, all holding hands. "That's you, Mommy," she said, pointing to the tallest figure. "You're the biggest because you take care of everyone." If only the Sullivans saw me that way, I thought, tucking the drawing carefully into my purse. But it didn't matter. Lily's perspective was the only one that counted. We were singing along to Lily's favorite song as we turned onto our street. I remember the exact moment when my voice faltered, when the melody died in my throat. There, piled on our front lawn like discarded trash, were our belongings. Clothes, books, toys, photo albums. Our life reduced to a humiliating display for the neighbors to gawk at. "Mommy, why is my teddy bear outside?" Lily asked, her voice small and confused. I couldn't answer. I parked the car and stepped out, my legs unsteady beneath me. Standing on the porch were Richard Sullivan, my husband Michael, his mother Elaine, and his 2 brothers, Thomas and James. A united front, a wall I suddenly realized I had never penetrated, despite 7 years of marriage and 1 child. "What's happening?" I asked, gripping Lily's hand as we approached. "Why are our things outside?" Richard stepped forward, his expression cold and resolute. He wore the same look I'd seen him use in business meetings when cutting ties with underperforming partners. "Emily," he said, my name sounding foreign on his lips. "This has been a long time coming. You've been freeloading for years now. It's time you stood on your own 2 feet." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "What are you talking about?" "The house," Richard continued. "It's a Sullivan family property. It always has been. We've allowed you to live here as a courtesy, but Michael has finally come to his senses. I looked past Richard to my husband, waiting for him to speak up, to explain that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. But Michael wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the ground, jaw clenched, silent. "Michael?" My voice cracked. "What's going on?" Elaine stepped forward, placing a protective hand on Michael's shoulder. "He's filed for divorce, dear. We've already spoken to our lawyers. Given your limited contributions to this marriage, you shouldn't expect much in the settlement." Limited contributions. The words echoed in my head, a cruel joke considering the millions I'd poured into their family business. I looked around at the faces watching me. Some smug, some uncomfortable, none sympathetic. "Where are we supposed to go?" I asked, feeling Lily press against my leg, sensing her growing fear. "That's hardly our concern," Richard replied. "A woman who doesn't contribute is a burden, Emily." I tried to tell Michael that from the beginning. He just needed time to see it for himself. I felt something shift inside me then, a fundamental change, as if the person I had been for the past 7 years was dissolving, revealing someone harder, colder, more determined. "Michael," I said again, ignoring Richard. "Look at me." Slowly, reluctantly, my husband raised his eyes to meet mine. What I saw there wasn't anger or hatred, it was worse. It was emptiness, indifference, as if I were already a memory, a chapter closed. "Your daughter," I said quietly. "You're throwing out your daughter." At this, Michael flinched. "We've arranged for her to stay with us 3 days a week," he said, his first words since I'd arrived. "The papers." "Don't talk to me about papers." I cut him off. "Look at her, Michael. Look at what you're doing to her right now." Lily was crying silently now, clutching her backpack to her chest like a shield. Michael glanced at her, then quickly away, as if the sight caused him physical pain. "This isn't about Lily," Richard interjected. "This is about you, Emily. You've never fit in with this family. You've never understood our values, our traditions. My son deserves a partner who can stand beside him as an equal, not someone who—" "Dad, enough," Michael interrupted, but there was no force behind it. Just weariness. "I want my teddy," Lily whimpered. "Why is all our stuff outside?" I knelt down to her level, wiping away her tears with my thumb. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're going to get your teddy and your special things, and then we're going on an adventure." "I don't want an adventure," she said. "I want to go home." Home. The word was a knife to my heart. I stood up, facing the Sullivan wall once more. "Let me get our essential belongings," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Then we'll be gone." "You have 1 hour," Richard replied. "After that, anything left goes to charity." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak further. I led Lily to the pile of our possessions and began sorting through them, identifying what we absolutely needed. Clothes, documents, Lily's comfort items. Everything else would have to wait. As I worked, I felt eyes on me. Looking up, I caught Elaine watching me from the porch, an odd expression on her face. Not quite regret, but something close to it. "You know," she said quietly, stepping closer so only I could hear. "This wasn't the plan. You were supposed to fight, to argue, to make a scene. Your dignity, it's unexpected." I stared at her, understanding dawning. "You wanted me to look unstable. For Lily's custody battle." She didn't deny it, which was answer enough. "Tell Richard," I said, turning back to my task, "that he should enjoy his success while it lasts." "Is that a threat?" Elaine asked, a new edge to her voice. I looked up at her, at the house I'd called home, at the family who had never truly accepted me, and felt a cold certainty settle in my chest. "No," I replied. "It's a promise." 1 hour later, Lily and I drove away, our essential belongings packed into my car, our old life shrinking in the rearview mirror. I had no home, no husband, and in their eyes, no future. But they were wrong. So very wrong. They thought they'd erase me. Instead, they'd unleash me. The hotel room was small but clean, with 2 double beds and a view of the parking lot. Nothing like the spacious Sullivan home with its manicured lawn and imported furniture. Lily sat cross-legged on one bed, silently arranging and rearranging her few rescued toys, her teddy bear, a worn doll, and the family of plastic dinosaurs Michael had given her for her birthday. I watched her from the small desk where I sat with my laptop open, pretending to be calm for her sake, while my mind raced with questions, plans, and a cold anger unlike anything I'd ever felt before. "Are we going to live here now?" Lily asked, not looking up from her toys. "No, sweetie," I said, forcing a smile. "This is just temporary, like camping but indoors." "Is Daddy camping too?" The innocent question pierced through my carefully maintained composure. How do you explain to a 5-year-old that her father chose his family's approval over her stability? That he stood by while his father threw her belongings onto the lawn? "Daddy is staying at the house for now," I said carefully. "You'll see him soon, but things will be a bit different." Lily nodded, accepting this with the resilience that only children possess. "Can we get ice cream for dinner?" I laughed despite everything. "Sure. Why not?" After Lily fell asleep that night, stomach full of chocolate ice cream and chicken nuggets, I finally allowed myself to think clearly about what had happened and what needed to happen next. Richard Sullivan's voice echoed in my head, "A woman who doesn't contribute is a burden." I opened my laptop and logged into my private banking portal, the one Michael knew nothing about. The numbers glowed back at me, proof of my years of careful investing, culminating in the massive injection of capital that had saved Sullivan Manufacturing. My phone pinged with an email from my broker, Peter. "Emily, just checking in. The Sullivan expansion into Asia looks promising. Your latest recommendations have increased projected profits by 15%. The old man doesn't know how lucky he is to have your insights. Dinner next week to discuss next steps?" I stared at the message, a plan beginning to form in my mind. Richard, Michael, the entire Sullivan family, they thought I had nothing. No home, no resources, no power. They were wrong on all counts. I typed a quick reply to Peter. "Need to meet tomorrow. Emergency situation." My usual cafe at 9 a.m.? His response came almost immediately. "Of course. Everything okay?" "No," I wrote back. "But it will be." I spent the next few hours making lists, sending emails, and methodically planning what needed to happen. By the time exhaustion finally pulled me towards sleep, I had a clear roadmap for the days ahead. The next morning, after dropping Lily at school with extra hugs and reassurances, I met Peter at the cafe, where we'd first discussed the anonymous investment in Sullivan Manufacturing 3 years ago. "My God, Emily," he said when I finished explaining what had happened. "They can't do that to you. It's barbaric." "Oh, but they did," I replied, stirring my untouched coffee. "And now I need to decide what happens next." Peter leaned forward, lowering his voice. "What are you thinking?" I met his eyes steadily. "I want out. All of it. Every penny I've invested in Sullivan Manufacturing." He paled slightly. "Emily, you know what that will do. You're not just an investor. You're the investor. The company's expansion, the new product lines, the Asian partnerships, it's all been funded by your capital. If you pull out now..." "I know exactly what it will do," I said. "That's the point." Peter studied me for a long moment. "This isn't like you. You've always been so careful, so strategic. This is..." "What?" "Vengeful? Destructive." I leaned back in my chair. 3 days ago, I would have agreed with you. But they didn't just betray me, Peter. They humiliated me in front of my daughter. They treated me like I was nothing. Worse than nothing. A burden. I pulled out my phone and showed him the text message I'd received from Michael that morning. "My lawyer will contact you about custody arrangements. Dad thinks 3 days a week is generous considering your situation." Peter winced. "I see your point. But scorched earth? Is that really what you want?" I considered his question carefully. Was it revenge I wanted? Yes, in part. But it was more than that. It was justice. Recognition. A reckoning long overdue. "Do you know why I kept my involvement in Sullivan Manufacturing a secret all these years?" I asked. Peter shook his head. "Because I thought family was more important than pride. I thought giving Michael and Lily's stability mattered more than getting credit. I convinced myself that being invisible was a strength, not a weakness. I laughed bitterly. And look where that got me. I pulled out a folder from my bag and placed it on the table between us. Here's what I want to do. As Peter reviewed my plans, his expression shifted from concern to grudging admiration. This is thorough. Not just pulling your investment, but reclaiming what's mine. I finished for him, including the house they so proudly threw me out of. His eyebrows shot up. The house. How is that? The down payment came from my personal funds, I explained. Michael doesn't know that. Neither does Richard. The title is in the Sullivan Family Trust, but I have the paper trail proving my contribution. It won't be enough to claim full ownership, but it will be enough to freeze any transactions while the courts sort it out. Peter closed the folder, a small smile playing at his lips. You know, for someone they dismissed as just a housewife, you're remarkably well prepared. They underestimated me, I said simply. That was their first mistake. And their second? I stood up, gathering my things, believing I would stay silent. I pulled out my wallet to pay for the coffee, but Peter waved me away. This one's on me, he said. Consider it an investment in your new beginning. I nodded my thanks and turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. Emily, when are you planning to tell them? I paused, thinking of Richard's smug certainty, of Michael's cowardly silence, of the pile of our belongings on the front lawn. Tomorrow, I said. I think I'll go directly to the source. As I walked out of the cafe, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael, taking Lily to Dad's for dinner tonight. We'll have her back by 8. I texted back, no. We had plans. She stays with me. His response was immediate and telling. Dad insists. He says it's important for her to maintain connections with the family. Richard Sullivan was already trying to manipulate my daughter away from me, using Michael as his puppet. The final confirmation that I was doing the right thing. Enjoy your dinner, I wrote back. Tomorrow will be interesting. I tucked my phone away and headed to my car, a strange calm settling over me. They thought I had nothing, no home, no family, no resources. Tomorrow, they would learn just how wrong they were. Sullivan Manufacturing occupied a sleek glass building in the heart of the business district, a far cry from the struggling warehouse operation it had been 3 years ago. I gazed up at it from the parking lot, remembering the first time Michael had proudly shown me around, back when we were newly engaged. One day, he'd said, all of this will be mine. Not ours.
Mine.
I should have seen the warning signs from the beginning. I straightened my blazer, a power suit I'd rarely worn since leaving my analyst position, and checked my reflection in the car window. I looked different today. Harder. Determined. Ready. The receptionist didn't recognize me at first. I'd only visited the office a handful of times over the years, always as Michael's wife, attending company functions. I need to see Richard Sullivan, I said. It's urgent. Do you have an appointment? She asked, not bothering to look up from her computer.
No.
But he'll want to see me. Something in my voice made her look up, eyes widening slightly. Your name, please? Emily Sullivan. Tell him it's about the Asian investment. 5 minutes later, I was being escorted to Richard's corner office by his nervous-looking assistant. News of my separation from Michael had clearly reached the company grapevine. I could feel curious eyes following me as I walked through the open office space. Mrs. Sullivan, Richard's assistant announced, showing me in. Richard was seated behind his massive desk, looking irritated at the interruption. His expression darkened when he saw me. Emily, this is unexpected and inappropriate. Any communication should go through our lawyers now. This isn't about the divorce, I said, closing the door behind me. This is about business. He laughed, short and dismissive. I'm afraid I don't have time for whatever this is. I have a company to run. For now, I replied, my voice deadly calm. Something in my tone must have registered because he paused, studying me more carefully. What does that mean? I placed a folder on his desk. Your investors pulled out, I said. Your company is sinking. He didn't touch the folder. What are you talking about? Our investors. Open it, I interrupted. With a sigh of exaggerated patience, Richard flipped open the folder. I watched his face as he scanned the first page, his expression shifting from annoyance to confusion to the first flickers of alarm. Where did you get these documents? He demanded. Keep reading. His face paled as he turned to the second page, then the third. By the fourth, his hands were trembling slightly. This can't be right, he muttered. Phoenix Capital Partners is rock solid. They've been our primary investor for years. They wouldn't just pull out without warning. Phoenix Capital Partners, I said, reaching across to tap the logo on the document, is a shell company. My shell company. Richard's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. What are you saying? I'm saying that I wasn't just an investor in Sullivan Manufacturing. I was the investor. I sat down in the chair across from him, suddenly enjoying this moment more than I should. Every major capital injection since the company nearly went bankrupt 3 years ago, that was me. Those brilliant expansion strategies you took credit for? My recommendations. The Asian partnerships you're so proud of? My connections. Richard shook his head, disbelief warring with growing horror. That's impossible. You're a housewife. You don't have that kind of money or expertise. Before I was your son's wife, I was Emily Chen, financial analyst specializing in manufacturing sector investments. And contrary to what you've always believed, I didn't come from nothing. My parents may not have had your social standing, but they believed in education and smart investing. I gestured to the documents. It's all there. The paper trail, the transactions, the communications that came through my broker. For 3 years, I've been propping up your company, watching you take credit for my ideas, listening to you mock me at family dinners while you built your success on my money. Richard was silent for a long moment, staring at the papers as if they might suddenly reveal a different truth. Then, in a voice much smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he asked, Why? For Michael. For Lily. I wanted them to have stability, security. I leaned forward. I never needed recognition. Never wanted it. Until you threw us out like garbage. The office door opened suddenly, and Michael burst in, looking frantic. Dad, Jenny just told me Emily's here. He stopped short when he saw me sitting calmly across from his father. Emily, what are you doing? Richard looked up at his son, his face ashen. Did you know about this? Know what? Michael looked between us, confused. I stood up. About Phoenix Capital. About where the money really came from to save your father's company. Michael's blank expression told me everything. What are you talking about? Your wife, Richard said bitterly, has apparently been our mystery investor all along. And now she's pulling out. The color drained from Michael's face. That can't be true. I pulled out my phone and brought up my banking app, turning the screen toward him to show the transaction history. Every dollar that kept this company afloat came from my personal funds. Funds I had before we married, that you never knew about because you never bothered to ask what I did before I became just a housewife. Michael sank into a chair, stunned. But why wouldn't you tell me? Would it have mattered? I asked quietly. Would you have stood up to your father when he belittled me? Would you have given me credit for my ideas instead of nodding along when he claimed them as his own? Would you have defended me when I was thrown out of our home? His silence was my answer. Richard had recovered enough to attempt damage control. Emily, let's be reasonable. Whatever grievances you have against the family, against Michael, we can work those out. But this, he gestured to the papers, this is business. You invested because you saw an opportunity. Don't throw that away out of spite. Opportunity. I laughed. I invested because Michael came home in tears, terrified that his father's legacy was crumbling. I invested because I believed family stood by family. I gathered up the documents, tucking them back into the folder. Clearly, I was mistaken. What happens now? Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked between father and son, these two men who had shaped my life for years, one with his constant disapproval, the other with his spineless compliance. Now I walk away. The withdrawal of funds has already been initiated. By this time tomorrow, Sullivan Manufacturing will be exactly where it was 3 years ago, on the brink of collapse. You can't do this, Richard said, desperation replacing his usual arrogance. I already have. I turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and one more thing. The house? I paid the down payment. Check with your lawyer. There should be an interesting development on that front by the end of the day. As I walked out, I heard Richard's roar of rage, followed by the crash of something heavy being thrown against the wall. But it was Michael's broken whisper that followed me down the hallway. Emily, please, what have I done? Too little, too late. The Sullivan family's collapse happened with stunning speed. I watched it unfold from a distance, like observing a building demolition, systematic, inexorable, and strangely mesmerizing. Peter kept me updated with daily reports, his voice oscillating between professional detachment and barely concealed awe at the devastation my withdrawal had caused. The Asian partners pulled out this morning, he informed me on the third day. Without your connections and guarantees, they don't see Sullivan Manufacturing as a viable partner anymore. I was sitting at a small desk in our new apartment, a modest two-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood, far from the Sullivan estate, but close to Lily's school. I'd found it the day after my confrontation with Richard, paying 6 months' rent in advance. It wasn't luxurious, but it had large windows that flooded the rooms with sunlight and a small balcony where Lily had already set up her dinosaur garden. And the company stock? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. In freefall. Down 68% since your withdrawal became public. The board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow. I closed my eyes, absorbing this information. Part of me had expected Richard to find a way out, to conjure up another miracle investor or leverage his connections to save the company. I'd underestimated how completely the business had come to depend on my support. Emily. Peter's voice pulled me back. They're trying to reach you. All of them. Richard, Michael, even Elaine. They've called my office dozens of times. What do they want? What do you think? They want you to reconsider, to reinvest, to save them.
He paused.
Michael left a message saying he's willing to sign whatever divorce settlement you want if you'll just meet with him. I laughed, a short, hollow sound. Now he's willing to negotiate. My phone buzzed with an incoming text. Michael again, the 12th message today. Please, Emily. Dad's in the hospital. Heart scare. Doctors say it's stress. We need to talk. I set the phone aside without responding. Are you sure about this? Peter asked carefully. I know they hurt you. Badly, but this is going to affect more than just Richard and Michael. The company employs over 300 people. It was a fair point, one that had kept me awake the past few nights. I'd never intended to punish innocent employees for the Sullivans' actions. I've thought about that, I said. I've set up a fund for employee severance and transition support. It won't save their jobs, but it will give them time to find new positions. I hadn't told Peter about this yet. It was a decision I'd made just that morning, transferring a significant portion of my remaining assets into the newly established fund. That's remarkably generous, considering the circumstances. This was never about hurting people who had nothing to do with what happened, I explained. It's about consequences for those who did. After hanging up with Peter, I checked on Lily, who was napping in her new room. Her walls were still bare. We hadn't had time to decorate yet, but she'd carefully arranged her rescued toys on the shelves, creating a sense of order amidst our upheaval. She was adapting better than I'd expected, though she still asked about Michael daily. My phone rang again, Elaine Sullivan. Surprisingly, this was her first attempt to contact me directly. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. Emily. Her voice sounded different, stripped of its usual smooth condescension, rough around the edges. Thank God you picked up. We need to talk. I have nothing to say to you, Elaine.
Please.
You've made your point. Brilliantly, I might add. Was that a hint of grudging respect in her tone? But it's gone far enough. Richard's in the hospital. The company is collapsing. Michael's a mess. You've won. This isn't about winning, I said quietly. It's about truth. About consequences.
Fine. Yes.
We were wrong. All of us. Horribly, unforgivably wrong. Her voice cracked, a sound so unexpected from the always composed Elaine Sullivan that I found myself listening more attentively. But destroying everything, is that really what you want? I thought about her question carefully. Was this what I wanted? The complete dismantling of the Sullivan legacy? The company Richard had originally built from nothing before I saved it? Michael's inheritance reduced to ashes? What I wanted, I finally replied, was to be treated with basic respect. To be seen as a person of value, not just Michael's inconvenient wife. To not be thrown out of my own home with my 5-year-old daughter. Silence stretched between us. Then, the house is yours. What? The house. Richard signed over the deed this morning. It's yours, free and clear. A gesture of, I don't know, apology? Desperation? Both, probably. I almost laughed. I don't want the house, Elaine. Then what do you want? She asked, exasperation bleeding through. Tell us what it will take to end this. The doorbell rang, probably the grocery delivery I'd scheduled. I have to go, I said. Emily, wait. I hung up and went to answer the door, but instead of the grocery service, I found Michael standing there, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Please, he said before I could speak. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. I should have shut the door in his face.
Part of me wanted to.
But the larger part, the part that had once loved this man, that had invested everything in our family, needed to hear what he had to say. 5 minutes, I agreed, stepping aside to let him in. Lily's asleep. Keep your voice down. Michael entered cautiously, looking around the apartment with surprise, perhaps expecting something much worse. His gaze lingered on the framed photo of Lily I'd placed on the entry table, the only decoration I'd had time to put up. It's over, he said without preamble. All of it. The company, the house, the family name. Everything Dad built, everything he made me believe was important. He turned to face me, and the worst part, he deserved it. We all did. I said nothing, waiting. I've spent the past 3 days thinking about everything you've done for us, for me, without ever asking for credit. His voice broke. While we treated you like you were nothing. Your father's in the hospital? I asked, changing the subject. Michael nodded. Minor heart attack. He'll recover, physically at least. His pride won't. And what about you? I asked. How are you recovering? He looked me directly in the eyes for the first time. I'm not. I don't deserve to. The raw honesty in his voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the Michael I knew. The man who always had an excuse, who always deferred to his father's judgment. This was someone new, someone broken and perhaps, just maybe, beginning to rebuild himself from the ruins. Your 5 minutes are up, I said. He nodded, turning to leave. At the door, he paused. I don't expect your forgiveness, Emily. But Lily, she doesn't deserve to lose her father because of my mistakes. Please don't keep her from me. As the door closed behind him, I realized with startling clarity that the empire I'd helped topple wasn't just the Sullivan business. It was the entire power structure that had defined our lives. And in its fall, something new was emerging from the wreckage. Something that, for the first time, felt like freedom. 3 months after Sullivan Manufacturing declared bankruptcy, Lily and I stood on the shore of a small lake, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. She skipped rocks across the surface, squealing with delight when one bounced 4 times before sinking. That's a new record. I called out, clapping my hands. Did you see, Mommy? 4 bounces. She held up 4 fingers, her face radiant with the simple joy of accomplishment. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen her this carefree. The first weeks after leaving the Sullivan house had been difficult for her. Nightmares, questions I couldn't fully answer, tears when she realized her favorite stuffed unicorn had been left behind during our hasty exit. But children are remarkably resilient. Gradually, the tears had become less frequent, the questions less pointed, the nightmares replaced by peaceful sleep. The divorce was finalized with surprising speed. Michael, true to his word, had agreed to every term I proposed: joint custody with primary physical custody to me, child support that exceeded state guidelines, and a complete separation of our financial lives with no claim on my assets. The lawyers had been shocked. Divorces among wealthy families rarely proceeded so smoothly. He's a broken man, my attorney had explained. And from what I can tell, he's trying to become a better one. I wasn't sure if that was possible, but for Lily's sake, I hoped it was true. Michael saw her twice a week now, picking her up for dinners and weekend activities. He'd rented a modest apartment near our new place, furnished it with child-friendly items, and seemed genuinely committed to rebuilding his relationship with his daughter. Richard's recovery had been less inspiring. After his release from the hospital, he'd retreated to a family vacation home in Vermont, refusing to speak to reporters about the company's collapse. According to Michael, he spent his days obsessively reviewing old company documents, as if searching for the exact moment everything had gone wrong, the moment he had failed to recognize the power of the woman he had dismissed for so many years. Elaine had surprised me most of all. After our phone conversation, she had reached out again, not to plead for the company, but to apologize, haltingly, awkwardly, but sincerely. "I always saw your potential," she'd admitted. "It frightened me. The way Richard looked to you for business advice in those early days, before he knew who you really were. I encouraged him to keep you at a distance. That was wrong of me." The Sullivan family had fractured along with their business. Thomas and James, Richard's other sons, had distanced themselves from their father, unwilling to be associated with his failure. The extended family, once so proud of their connection to Sullivan Manufacturing, now barely acknowledged the relationship. "Mommy, I'm hungry," Lily announced, breaking into my thoughts. "Can we have pizza for dinner?" "Pizza sounds perfect," I agreed, taking her hand as we walked back to the car. Our new life had settled into comfortable rhythms. I'd used a portion of my remaining assets to start my own investment consulting firm, working primarily with women entrepreneurs. The hours were flexible, allowing me to be there when Lily came home from school. Our apartment, initially a temporary refuge, had become a true home, filled with color and laughter, and Lily's artwork covering the refrigerator. When we arrived back at the apartment, there was a package waiting at our door. No return address, just Lily's name printed neatly on the label. "Can I open it?" she asked excitedly. "Let me check it first." I examined the package carefully before handing it to her. "Go ahead." She tore into the wrapping paper with typical 5-year-old enthusiasm, then gasped, "My unicorn." She pulled out the stuffed toy she'd been forced to leave behind, along with a small envelope. Inside was a note, written in Elaine's precise handwriting. "I found this while cleaning out the house. I thought Lily might miss it."
Yes.
A small gesture, but a meaningful one. The Sullivans were learning, some faster than others, that family was more than a name, more than a legacy, more than a business empire. Later that night, after Lily was asleep with her recovered unicorn clutched tightly in her arms, I sat on our small balcony with a glass of wine, gazing at the city lights. My phone buzzed with a text from Peter. "The Employee Transition Fund is making a real difference. 80% of former Sullivan employees have found new positions. You did good, Emily." I smiled, feeling a sense of completion. The revenge that had initially driven me had transformed into something more meaningful, a restitution, a restoration of balance. The next morning, I woke to Lily bouncing on my bed. "Daddy's taking me to the Science Museum today," she announced. "And he says after, maybe we can have ice cream." "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart," I said, helping her pick out clothes for the day. When Michael arrived to pick her up, I noticed changes in him, subtle but significant. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by casual jeans and a simple sweater. The arrogant tilt of his chin had softened. Even the way he spoke to Lily was different, more attentive, more present. "We should be back around 4, he told me, avoiding direct eye contact as he often did now, shame still evident in his demeanor. "Take your time," I replied. "I have some work to finish anyway." As they were leaving, Lily turned back to me. "Mommy, are you happy now?" The question caught me off guard with its perceptiveness. Children see more than we give them credit for. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm happy now," I answered truthfully. After they left, I sat down at my desk to review a business proposal from a promising female entrepreneur who had approached my firm for funding and guidance. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had come full circle, from anonymous investor to visible mentor, from shadow to substance. My phone rang, a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something compelled me to pick up. Is this Emily Chen? A woman's voice, professional and direct. Yes, it is. My name is Diana Zhao, CEO of Eastbridge Technologies. I've heard impressive things about your investment strategies and business acumen. I'd like to meet to discuss a potential partnership. As I scheduled the meeting, I realized that this, not revenge, not validation, not even justice, was what I had been working toward all along. The freedom to be recognized for my abilities, to build something meaningful on my own terms, to show my daughter what a woman's power truly looks like. The Sullivan Empire had fallen, but from its ashes, something far more valuable had risen. A life where neither Lily nor I would ever be invisible again.